Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about the latest statements from the Finance Minister regarding the IMF mission's visit, what he said as far as the dialogue with them is concerned, as far as the interaction with them is concerned, and what we hope on the Pakistan front as far as the IMF and, of course, our economic, the way forward for us as on the economic front, and of course the fact that it remains the priority for the government as we speak, as it has since the government came in. We'll be talking about all of this today. We'll be talking about right sizing, fiscal matters, which is something the Finance Minister spoke about. Of course, the constructive discussions as far as revenue and taxation enforcement is concerned, all of that today on Perspective. I have with me Dr. Khaqan, Hassan, Najeeb, who's senior economist and former advisor on finance. He's also a public policy expert, economic policy making, economic policy making and fiscal management. It's always a pleasure to have him. We also have with us Dr. Usman Chohan, who's an advisor on economy. Thank you for being with us today. And Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, who's former ambassador to the World Trade Organization and a senior economist. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to go to Dr. Khaqan and then I'll come to you. Dr. Khaqan, this visit of the IMF mission and their interaction with the government, how do you look at it in the light of what we've spoken about in the past, in the light of the enforcement of the policies and the goals that have been set for us also by the IMF? How do you look at it firstly?
So, Mahrukh, whenever you and I have spoken, I've always maintained that Pakistan's economy needs the support of the fund, and prudent policy making would be to stay engaged with the fund. And we've seen that from macroeconomic instability to where we are today, where we can see nascent macro stability, which very simply means for the common people that inflation, the rate with which prices were going up in the country, has come down from 29% in 23, 24% in 24, and now we are seeing somewhere in single digits, and I think we may end up around 10% on the average. Our current account balance is financeable. That's the most important part. And consequently, our reserves are now covering more than 2 months of imports. Where we were talking default, today we are bringing down our policy rate and hoping that beyond the Pakistan Stock Exchange investment, the country can see some kind of realistic investment in manufacturing, agriculture, IT, ITES, and get some domestic economy moving. This is primarily because we have stuck with the 9-month SBA and now we've moved on to an extended fund facility. But having said that, let me also say this now, since we are in a program, that Pakistan has never been able to complete a program. The only long-term engagement that Pakistan completed as far as all the reviews were concerned was the 2013-16. And I know that for a fact because I was one of the core team members when anchoring that program and when we went on to completion. So engagement with the fund this time is a bit different than it has been in the past. And the reason is that we used to have quarterly reviews and now we've moved on to 6 monthly reviews. This is easier for the country, but then most of the authorities would fall back.
Dr. Khaqan, does it also show that as far as the confidence of the fund is concerned, they're fairly, I mean, we seem to be doing better today than we were, let's say, 3 years ago or 2 years ago or so, in terms of our confidence building with the IMF, our interaction, like you said, it needs to be a continuing one, of course.
I think CBMs are generally better with across our partners, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, China, and the fund, who are all involved in the process of bringing us back to macro stability. And I think, yes, that would be a fair statement to say that's why the fund moved on to the 6-month facility. But the other statement would also have to be made here that within 6 to 8 weeks of the approval, the fund had to field a mission in Pakistan to do one word, and that's stock taking of where we stood. Now, I mean, one can look at it both ways. I look at it in a more positive sense that it's okay, the fund came, There were lags, those were discussed, and we can talk about it. There were areas where there was less of a concern that didn't come up. For example, the monetary side is doing better. Our monetary easing is more than expected. The fund didn't raise any questions. I still think we've met all the gross external financing needs that Pakistan has. I think we are ahead of target, though I think newspapers would quote it differently. And the reason I say that is that I think the current account would be much lower than what was expected by the fund, which was $3.5 billion at the end of this fiscal year. I think we'll be far short of that figure. So our gross external financing needs are also comfortable. I think all the loans have been rescheduled or reprofiled, whatever word one wants to use, that $16 billion. So I think we are largely comfortable. But now come to the harder part, where we've always, for 77 years, we found it hard to do. One, we've not been able to move on the taxation broadening. That still stays to be the case. Whether it's agriculture, retail, real estate, and I don't think the nation wants to go into a discussion on the very deep aspects, but we are weaker. We are weaker on the tax collection that was agreed. I think that figure that was agreed in June, I think it was a short time. We were going into a budget. We wanted the program. We wanted to move on. The fund also was keen to stay engaged. So we went all the way to 13 trillion, making a 40% jump from last year. Now, I think considering where inflation was going down, not only Pakistan inflation, the global inflation was falling. Global interest rates were coming down. The oil prices were going down. Pakistan's inflation came down quickly. So the autonomous growth, and that simply means that growth that would automatically come in the 9,400 billion that we had collected last year would be less. I think even the measures that were taken, 1,500 or 1,800 billion, getting to that 40% mark would have been difficult. There is a shortfall in the first quarter. It's not a shortfall that one would fall off the chair. It's a 90 billion shortfall, and that's why I think the fund has gone back. My understanding, both from domestic sources
Dr.
and
Khaqan,
international.
let me try to understand, for the viewers also, those who are not, necessarily economic savvy. In your opinion, as far as where things are at this time, first of all, you think we're on the right track, right?
I think macro stability has returned to Pakistan. It has returned fairly quickly. The economy is behaving as it should be behaving with an engagement of the fund, and we are secure for the next 3 years on the external side. It's the domestic work that we have to do now.
Do you expect the downward trend as far as inflation is concerned to keep going down? I mean, do you think that this trend will, is going to follow that path to, like you are saying, worldwide also, globally also?
So I think where Pakistan has come in terms of inflation is that the major price pass-throughs on the energy sector have passed. That's the best news for the people. I think we've done well on the food prices. Food prices have stabilized, and somewhere there is disinflation. There's gone down also because we had bumper crops last year. Agriculture grew 6%. I think that really helped bring down inflation. So energy price pass-throughs major have passed. The food prices are stable. As long as there is no shock to the economy, in whether it's internal or external, I think inflation can fall in that 7% kind of a framework in this or at least the next year. So yes, I think we are comfortable there.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Khaqan. Thank you for joining us. I know that you're short of time. Thank you for being with us today. I'm going to go to Dr. Usman here. Dr. Usman, what Dr. Khaqan said about inflation, is it also, we've spoken about this earlier on, is it this trend going to continue is it going to trickle down to the lower strata of society, in your opinion?
Yes, I do believe that the pass-through will happen. Already, as was mentioned, you're seeing something on the food side, disinflation. The energy side also is getting better. As long as there is no big hiccup, and that hiccup probably wouldn't be domestic, it would probably of an international nature. You see these tensions in the Middle East, and everybody's waiting with bated breath. The regime has changed in Washington. It has a different agenda on Ukraine and Russia and on Palestine, Israel. So until we know how things are going to pan out, there's always this risk that the global supply chains might go topsy-turvy and we would bear that brunt. But if you look at the domestic equation alone, I think that we have already suffered considerably in this decade. You know, 5 years out of the 2020s have passed. There was COVID, there was post-COVID. I mean, it is a lot of turmoil for any society to go through. And you have to give the people credit for withstanding this decade so far with such resilience. I mean, stoically, it isn't easy for any of us. A salaried class, we suffer. The classes that are less fortunate suffer even more. But still, we've done a good job, and I think things are going to look better going forward.
Fair enough. Let me go to Dr. Manzoor. Dr. Manzoor, what about, you know, having, as far as tax is concerned, and, you know, the concern for tax to GDP ratio, which is something that has come up again and again as far as Pakistan is concerned. The measures that have been taken recently, how do you look at them, and do you think that they're sustainable, and do you think that they're going to be garnering the kind of results that we want from them?
Well, yes, you know, and lots of other macroeconomic indicators are on the positive side.
Okay.
On the tax side, there's indeed a shortfall of about 190 billion or something. So that's concerning. But as already said, Khaqan and Dr. Chohan, it's several factors. I mean, first, I mean, tax target was raised by 40%. You see, the inflation is down. Normally, if the inflation is up, the tax also goes up. And also, a lot of our tax comes from imports, because we indirect taxes a lot. And that's been quite under control. Our imports have really not been growing because the government purposely kept them because, you know, we had shortage of foreign exchange, etc. So that's another reason. And also, you know, we collect taxes on, say, petroleum and other things, and the prices, and it depends on the price. So if the price is lower, so lower taxes. So there is a problem. But what the government has been doing is to digitize the economy, and they put a lot of emphasis on that. And I think that's going to give results maybe another another 6 months or so.
And this time, Dr. Usman, we talk about 6 months or so. In terms of a trickle-down effect, do you think it's going to be longer than that? Because, you know, we talk about inflation going down, but the reason I bring it up again is that it, you know, it has to translate to every strata of society. And I mean, how are we doing on that front, in your opinion?
It's a very important point to re-emphasize that inflation, as we understand it, is not the good news that people might emotively feel. That is because inflation is the rate of change between what was before and what is now. So that rate is slowing, but that rate is still positive. So people may expect to some degree disinflation, which is unlikely on most fronts because you're not necessarily going to see things get cheaper. It is simply that the rate is slowing down. Keep in mind the way that the rupee has been. I mean, I was hearing a story, my grandfather said that the salary that you would pay to a domestic helper was 2 rupees in 1960, and now it's 30,000. So how do you go from a number like 2 to 30,000? Just project that out to what it would be. There is a natural trajectory in emerging markets towards inflation that is very atrocious, and so, you know, you have to keep that in mind, that what we want in emerging markets generally is an inflation rate, ideally of between 7 and 12%. That would be all right. Right now, we're in that space. So if we continue to have this going forward, you will naturally see that as long as our economic growth matches that, we're more than happy.
As far as, Dr. Manzoor, as far as long-term goals are concerned, when we look at our industry, we look at, you know, of course, Dr. Khaqan also said that there's only one program that we managed to complete. This program seems to be, you know, I think the closest we've ever been to you know, getting to that goal. When we do get to that, in terms of getting more independent, you know, sustainable ourselves, how long do you think it's going to take us to move towards that as a country, as a nation?
Yeah, you see, from where we were, I mean, for the last 4, 5, 6 years, there was a fear, when do we go in default?
Yeah.
Because there was always a fear that do we have enough to pay for our imports? In fact, if you look at just a year or 2 years ago, the containers had come into the port of Karachi, but they didn't have enough the foreign exchange to pay for them and clear them.
Yeah.
So from there we have moved a long way forward. And even last year, I mean, we were actually negative growth. So this year at least it's 2.5. Next year they expect something like 3%. But the indicators are much better. I mean, okay, maybe we did very well in agriculture last year, and perhaps this may not continue because it depends on the weather and other things.
The crops.
But if international factors, as well as the domestic factors, international factors, as Dr. Chohan was saying, I mean, the big factor is the crude oil and petroleum products, because 30% of our imports come from there. And only 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, the price was about $100. Now it's $70. So that gives quite a bit of relief. And then our bunker crops, because if we don't have to import wheat and cotton and other things, so that saves us. That saves our foreign exchange. So I think we are on the right track, unless something goes wrong.
But you're saying it's difficult to say how long it will take for us to become independent the way we want as a nation, to be able to sustain ourselves, basically.
Yes, but the government expects, that's what the government is saying, maybe they have more information, that they will not be seeking
another program.
Another program. So that means that they intend to. But I think they have to do 2 or 3 important things. I mean, whatever commitments they give to IMF on reforms. One is state-operated enterprise, because they put something like 900 billion rupees every year in sinking into that. That's one thing. Second is this energy sustainable. I mean, it's been not really. There's a lot of circular debt and losses, etc. and that's the next thing. And the third thing is, this taxation reforms. They are on it, but they have to get going. So these reform processes have been lingering on for too long. At a certain moment you have to, what they say, you got to go for a kill. I mean, you have to finish that. And these reform process that, for example, I think I was listening to something on TV, and they said the Prime Minister is soon going to announce what kind of homegrown reforms are going to be.
Yes.
So hopefully he takes that decision, because this decision was also taking a lot of time, because they had
because it's
plans.
A difficult decision, really.
Yeah, but there's no choice. They have to do these reforms.
Right. Dr. Usman, do you agree with what Dr. Manzoor is saying? And do you agree that in terms of reforms, what is your view? Where are we? State-owned enterprises we've been talking about for a long time. The government has taken, concrete step towards that. But there are hitches, and we've seen that happen. It's not very easy, right?
Oh yes, well said. I fully agree with Dr. Manzoor. And I think that we've kicked the can down the road for too long. We've kicked it down the road for 77 years. And now the climate is positive, favorable, macroeconomically, but the relationship with the IMF is peculiar, and I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing, because imagine a student who's performing very poorly in school and they're in detention, and the school teacher now is looking over their shoulder at every answer that the kid is doing. That's sort of the relationship, because they came unannounced and they came within 6 weeks of signing the deal. It's almost like the school teacher is looking over your shoulder to make sure you answer everything right. And what we're signaling, and I think our finance minister is doing a very good job at this, is looking back at the teacher and saying, you chill out, because we are working very hard. And this is the right signal to send. The IMF has expressed their satisfaction on certain key things. For example, the National Fiscal Pact. I think this is very important. The smaller provinces demographically, they were very eager to lend assistance. It was actually our largest province that was slower, but the pact is done. These kinds of things have a structural meaning, which is very positive. And I think this reassurance by our finance minister is exactly how you should proceed. It's not just for our domestic audiences to tell them that things are getting better, but also looking back at the school teacher and saying, we're not the bad student here, and you're not a great teacher either. That kind of relationship is, I think, very, very good. So a credit to our finance minister for that.
Dr. Manzoor, when we move forward in terms of prices, in terms of how things are going to be, in terms of the economy, the way it's structured, Do you think, I mean, which sectors, in your opinion, are particularly important and are going to be the focus here? Because we saw construction, and then the fact that it came under a lot of glare also. What do you see in the future?
Well, personally, I would prioritize services, especially information technology, because you don't have to import anything. You don't for other say manufacturing, you have to import about 80% of that. You do some value addition, but and we've done well in the last 1 or 2 years, but it's still less than 4 billion. India is 200 billion. Why can't we get to 25, 30 billion? But unfortunately, here the government's attention maybe is divided. I mean, we internet, there's problems with internet and all these things. They have to be fully devoted to this. They have to sort out all the problems. Many countries, I can give you even some European examples. For example, East European countries, many of them. So they decided, okay, we'll focus on this, we'll lower the income tax, we lower this. And for example, I was giving example of Romania. They used to be going all over Europe as domestic help, etc. And once they made this decision, Europeans are coming to live in Romania because the tax rate is very low, and they're the best performing in that sector. So that will be the first sector. But I would also stress on manufacturing, because we have not been doing well. I mean, this is one area where our large-scale manufacturing, for example, was still a negative. I mean,
do you agree that agriculture is something that we can't really bank on because of the climate and because of a host of other issues?
No, everything has to go together, I must say, because agriculture provides livelihood for about 40% of people.
Yes, that is
but
true.
What we have to do in agriculture is, first, the government has to get out. I mean, this government's procurement, etc. That's a lot of wastage, etc. The corruption. So government has to get out. Let people decide what they want to grow, what they want to export. They should not be holding up if they want sugar to be exported or imported. That should be open. So these things they have to liberalize in agriculture. But and also they have to provide them the basic things like fertilizer and other needed things. But all these three sectors are important, I must say. It's services, because 60% of our GDP was not giving us that much in terms of export. Manufacturing, because it's very heavily taxed. So manufacturing has not been doing very well. And and agriculture last year they did very well, 6% growth, everything doubled, export doubled from 4 billion, 3 billion to 8 billion, etc. So I hope we can keep some momentum there, but these other two areas have to pick up.
Dr. Usman, we talked about energy a little bit. What are the major challenges, in your opinion, with the energy sector not giving us what we want?
Yes. The major challenge, if you want to distill it to one thing, is that it is fundamentally difficult to have a long-term vision on what energy needs of a country like us will be.
Okay.
And because of that, we actually haven't had a coherent and cohesive framework for energy. You'll hear rhetoric, you'll see papers shuffled around, but it is fundamentally impossible to do, because just imagine what the energy mix of countries was all around the world 30 years ago and what it is today. For example, solarization has changed so much. The reliance on hydrocarbons is going down. So much is changing in it. Our population continues to grow.
Overpopulation is actually a huge problem, and that's something that, of course, we saw has been mentioned.
Absolutely. So the demands are also increasing. The seasonality, how many people have an air conditioner today versus 30 years ago? And what part is going to manufacturing? Actually, not that much if you take out the cyclicality of summer air conditioning for houses. So it's hard to do that. And right now, the difficulty is that we are locked into contracts. It's easy to bully people who are local local in terms of contracts, but are you going to bully Chinese firms in the same way? Probably not. The fact is that these contracts were done with a different state of mind, different projections of economic growth that were not realized, different energy mixes, how you would transport the raw material, which parts of the country, how you would produce it, how far is it from the cities. The basic plan is not coherent and cohesive, and I don't blame anybody in particular, because I understand that modernity has come so swiftly to a society that was basically in stasis for 4,000 years, and now you want them to go to solar panels in a Stone Age mindset. It's very difficult, not just for us. Even developed countries are tackling, for example, Australia. Solarization is putting their grid under unusual stress. So the transformations of modernity, the consequences, and then post-modernity is so traumatic that nobody can really deal with it. That's it.
Dr. Manzoor, there's something else the Prime Minister specifically spoke about, the collaboration between the provinces and the centre. We also talk about, of course, there being, the policy that has to be carried through by the provinces under the leadership of the Federation. That cohesiveness also with regard to KP, also with different political parties, leading in different provinces. Also there being the stability that is needed. All of those things are also equally important for economic growth.
Yeah.
So the government is dealing with that as a challenge also. Do you agree with there also?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. Previously, IMF, most of these discussions and everything was federal government. This time they involve the provincial governments because they want provincial government to collect more taxes and also they're pushing the federal government to allow to devolve those areas which had been agreed but which were lingering on federation as well as the provinces. But fortunately, this the provinces, the IMF asked what they call national pact or something, fiscal pact, and all the provinces agreed. They already signed it without much fuss. I think Syed had some reservations, but they also came around. So all the provinces are into it, and the provinces have agreed to push up their agriculture income tax. So provinces are I think, far more positive than that was the case previously.
Okay, so you think that's a green light and it's something positive to see
yes,
as
in
far
fact,
as
I would go a step further. The government should go even for further devolution, because otherwise running these things from the capital or from the provincial capital, they should go for devolution. And that will save them a lot of resources, because the local districts at the SC level, they know what their needs are. It's not for Islamabad to determine through this PSDP, which is mostly, influentials gutted, and most of the country is left behind. So they should go even further.
But as it is, we've seen, the province is empowered to quite an extent, Dr. Usman, if you agree with what I'm saying. I also want to talk about the private sector. And the goals for the private sector, which is something again that was emphasized both by the COS, so by the finance minister, particularly when he spoke. This private sector, the role of the private sector, first of all, how do you think they're doing, candidly speaking?
Well, candidly speaking, first of all, I want to express admiration for the finance minister's point of view on this, because he's just put it point blank that, it's not the business of government to do business. And he comes from a private sector bent, so he's very acutely aware of the sensitivities. He's had to face a lot of blowback. He is engaged with the private sector groups, and they have given him a tough time, and he's compassionate about this. So certainly they're listening to this. And the government overall also realizes that this burden is just unsustainable. The problem has always been that vested interests have steered policy in a way that hasn't allowed merit and private enterprise to rise up. You therefore have monopolies, you have vested interests of all sorts that distort competition. Policies therefore reflect that, and so there's not a level playing field for private sector to come up. You may remember this gesture, I think it was 2 years ago, that the Commerce Chamber, they just handed the keys to the state bank governor and said, we're not ready for this, we just can't handle this anymore. And these are symbolic gestures, but the fact is that the private sector is the driving force, and as Dr. Manzoor mentioned, Eastern Europe, what the revolution was is that it unleashed private energy, and many of those countries are doing very well, even though they're in the shadow of probably expansion of a war, God forbid. So their private energy's release has taken them to tremendous leaps and bounds, plus the EU and all the rule of law and all that helps. Those are exactly the things that we would need here, and we can't expect a savior from outside. The IMF is a bête noire. It is a boogeyman that is being used to push against vested interests, not just in Pakistan, but countries like Peru, Chile, Ecuador. They also used it as a bête noire to push difficult decisions. But ultimately, it is the realization that our ordinary people's energies and sense of enterprise is very powerful. And the accounts of that go back to, if you want to read into this stuff, the 1960s, West Pakistan, Karachi, these people came into the city, started businesses. Their diaries are very inspiring how dynamic things used to be.
But in terms of the things like tax collection, fiscal reform, which is something that again has been emphasized, there is the stress is, that we need to mobilize revenue, we need to ensure that, we need to work on tax collection. Yes. As far as, like you said, we've increased by 40% in, for the salaried class, and correct me if I'm wrong. So in that sense, don't you think that it's too much to expect on our front?
Absolutely. So insofar as the salaried class goes, I think that it is very distortionary. I think that the impact has been too heavy, and people like us, we bear the brunt of this. We're not going to, you can't tax your way to prosperity fundamentally. What you have to do is look at the balance. A good economy is all about balance, and we have to look at our expenditures as much as taxes. But because we negotiated this agreement with the IMF in a period of distress, I mean, think what the world economy was like in January. So we said fine to that, and then measures were taken. But again, it's the sacred cows that have to be broken. These false idols have to be. Agriculture is one of them, but there's plenty other sectors that have to be. And what we're looking for, even within revenue collection, is balance. Central versus provincial, private versus public, all sorts of balance. And our economy, because it's been fundamentally unbalanced for 77 years, restoring that balance by the force of the sword, as we say in Urdu, Bazor-e-Shamshir, is going to be painful, but it has to be done.
As far as, Dr. Manzoor, as far as coming and dealing with issues that are, issues like, reform, which are a big problem for any government to take. And, it takes a very bold government to go as far as this one has. As far as dealing with these issues are concerned, do you think it's going to have an, like I said, is this going to take a long time to impact us? Or do you think that these decisions, when they happen, are going to have immediate impact for us, for the economy, for the people?
You see, it's both. It depends on how deep the reforms are. For example, we look at next door India. They started, and then they have to continue. Maybe it's slow, but if from, for example, we are growing now at 2.5%, and maybe it goes to 4%, 5%, 6%, that's good enough. So long you continue. Our problem has been that we go 2 steps and then stop. So we have to continue with it. But reforms anywhere, any country you look at, once they take in reforms, it had an impact. We just look at last 1 year, 2 years, and even the interim government.
And we've seen that
interim government took some reforms. Maybe the growth wasn't there, but we are seeing all these results.
Yeah.
I mean, the deficit is under control, and you look at any indicator. In fact, it's miraculous how Pakistan, where it was going 30 years, as Dr. Chohan was saying. Inflation was so high, and within a year it's come down. All those other things. But no, now they are coming to some tough decisions like privatization. Unfortunately, they didn't quite succeed in PIA, but they are there. They can just now tweak it and get some result there. So they can once they get on.
Would you say that these kind of hitches were perhaps expected?
Oh yes, I mean, this privatization is never easy in any country. I mean, look at any airlines or anywhere. It takes trial and error. I mean, we have been at it for a long time. Okay, we did these banks very successfully in 2004, 5, somewhere. But then there was a military government, and all these banks were really going down. I mean, they were on the verge of default. So that happened. And look at the banks. They are so successful. They are paying so much tax. Previously, they were taking money from the government. Now they are paying money to the government. And so all these other things, I think the government has just to push, and as they've done for some other things like energy reforms. How difficult it was to raise petrol prices. I mean, people were used to paying, being subsidized, and okay, there was some problem, but then people got adjusted.
But do you see all the burden sort of transferring to the people immediately?
No, they should not. They should not, because unfortunately we collect too many taxes on indirect. That gets passed on to and they should go to direct sources, a direct tax. For example, you were talking earlier about agriculture tax, or 40% of our economy is this retail, wholesale, and agriculture. So hardly pay even 2%. And then of the 60% of services, like our doctors, like our lawyers, look at their fee and look at what they're paying. So if they are able to, and they should not any longer go on for people who are already overtaxed, like salary class, like some of them, like even manufacturing. They should not, and the other thing they must do is that half of our economy is in the grey sector.
So I'm going to talk about grey and black economy. How do you?
Yes, if they bring the grey black economy in the white sector, so they don't need to raise anything. Your tax etc. will automatically double.
But we haven't been able to do that. We haven't been able to take them into tax.
Yes, the reason is because our taxation policies are so wrong, because people are forced into. I mean, we have one of the highest tariff rates on imports. So people rather go for smuggled goods because it's not economical to import. Similarly, the other taxes, sales tax, any of these taxes, they have to do those reforms, they have to bring, and there have been studies done that if they bring down the taxes, actually the rate, if they bring down rate, the actual collection will go up.
Dr. Usman, in terms of the difficult decisions immediately, what are some of the difficult decisions that you foresee coming in the next couple of months, for example?
To be honest, I think that the brunt has already been borne. The hardest things were already done. And I'm looking particularly in line with the framework that has been agreed with the IMF. You have already seen action on the key things. For example, getting everybody on board in terms of a national fiscal pact is done. Talking to the independent power producers, those conversations, however acrimonious or unpleasant they may be, are being taken. Similarly, on things like reducing inflation, the appropriate measures are being taken. I think that the major suffering has already been done. And I'm appealing to your sensibility as a patriot and a compassionate person, that you hear a little bit of both. I do agree with Dr. Manzoor in the subtext of what he has said, that even when you increase petrol prices, you actually see more cars out there, because there is a lot of crying wolf and things are not as bad. And at the same time, there is a lot of misery out there. A lot of people have had to make tough decisions within their households, which creates discord, which damages the psychology of people and the sociology, which is the direct consequence of economic hardship.
But what is said, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interject here, but what is said at this time by most people, and this is not a statement for somebody, again, who's with an economic background, but overall the pinch, so to speak, has been felt by, a lot of the classes that hadn't even, known austerity before, or to be careful, or so in that sense, don't you agree that the issue has, it's been felt all over generally, maybe not as much, but it has, transcended classes even.
It has transcended the class barrier, but the resistance is not proportionate across classes, because political power is not proportionate across classes. So many vested interests have found buffers and have expressed reticence, and it's only by force that they're partially being dragged in, and that's why the IMF showed up. That are you really following up on all these other line items? There's 40 things on there. So there are different levels of political power among classes, and because of that, you will see more suffering in certain localities, in certain classes. And that is, I think, unfair, because we think of the national interest above all.
Dr. Manzoor, do you agree? You think
yes, I fully share his views.
In terms of so then if we look at what Dr. Usman is saying is that we've already done most of the suffering, and now we just have to basically stick to the plan, and we'll be able, and as far as the path is concerned, and then we'll be able to see results.
Yes,
But it's impossible to have a timeline.
No, we have done all those things, but somehow we have not broken into this elite capture. For example, we have a few companies, auto companies, they have very high tariffs and they just, flourish in that. They don't need to export, but they can keep making profit. So there are lots of sectors like this, which are, I should say, they're very powerful, and we have done nothing to make them.
So you're saying that unless we tap into those sectors,
yes,
we cannot have the results that we want.
I mean, there'll be partial results, but then it's unfair. Now everybody is saying, why just tax the salary class? Why not others? Because they're feeling the pinch. So, everybody is feeling upset. Why no shopkeeper is paying even 3,000 a month? They make a lot of money. So if there is this resentment that, you have a few sectors, all the pampering, all the money goes into them, and rest of the country, for example, in Pakistan, if you want to make an engineering goods or if you want to make a software, you have to pay duties on even computers and your phone and everything.
Yes.
But if you want to make, cotton into yarn, your machinery is free, everything, because they have a very powerful lobby. So we have to deal with these powerful lobbies. So government has to get out of the way and provide level playing field.
Right, fair enough. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Usman Chohan. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, thank you for your valuable time. Dr. Khaqan, Hassan, Najeeb, thank you for being with us. We spoke about, of course, the IMF staff visit and the way, as far as the economic findings are concerned, and where we are as far as a country in terms of the road ahead and what the government envisages for us. And of course, the fact that the indicators do look good, and if we stick to the path, we will have the kind of results that we want. Of course, tapping into sectors that remain untapped today is a cause of concern for the government, and of course, they seem to be working in that direction, as of course privatization and huge reform underway. Let's keep our fingers crossed, because things seem to be looking brighter as we speak. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.